Thank you again for joining today's webinar. The topic of today's webinar is Beyond Financial Aid, How Colleges Can Strengthen the Financial Stability of Low-Income Students and Increase Student Outcomes. This happens to be the title of a new toolkit commissioned by the Lumina Foundation. On today's webinar, we will have two of the co-authors of this toolkit. But before I go ahead and introduce the topic and our panelists, I just want to introduce the staff on today's call. My name is Alyssa. I'm Assistant Director of Programs, and here with me is Julian Haynes, an Associate Director of Programs at Achieving the Dream. Appearing on this slide is the toolkit that I emailed out last week, and I also emailed it out about a half an hour ago, just as a reminder. Please have the toolkit in front of you during this webinar, as our panelists will be referencing it, and it'll be helpful for you to follow along. So the following toolkit addressed three critical questions of, first, how can your institution assess its readiness and capacity to support low-income students? It also asks, what strategies can your institution consider adopting to better support low-income students? And finally, what initial steps can your institution take to strengthen the support to low-income students? The toolkit makes the case for broad integrated financial support for low-income students, provides a framework for 6 strategies your institution might consider utilizing, and includes a self-assessment and interpretation guide. Our two panelists on today's webinar are Rob Johnstone and Priya Cheplot. They're both from the National Center for Inquiry and Improvement. We hope you enjoy the webinar, and thank you again for joining us. As always, at the end of the webinar, we will hold an open Q&A session. And now I'm going to go ahead and give the floor to Priya.
Thank you so much, Alyssa, and thank you to everyone who is on the webinar today. We are so excited that we can share some of the work that we've been doing for the last few months around low-income students and financial stability with you. And on behalf of Rob, we're really excited that so much of what we're doing corresponds closely to the work that you're doing through the WFSN Community Colleges Initiative. And we're hoping that there are opportunities where what we've been working on can also support the work that you've been doing as well. So, Alyssa, would you move on to the next slide, please? Great. So today's agenda is a little ambitious. One thing to keep in mind is, though we only have an hour-ish together, a lot of what we're going to be covering is in the toolkit that has been provided to you in much greater detail. And what we'd like to use today's webinar for is a chance to help you navigate through the toolkit, to kind of pull out some of the major points, to discuss some of the examples that might help your work, but also to help empower you to use the toolkit in a way that fits the needs of your teams and your colleges the best. So we'll take a little bit of time to frame the conversation around what we mean around financial stability, what kind of strategies we propose, what kind of support resources we have for you, and then we're actually going to walk through the toolkit. So the toolkit covers these 4 major areas. Who are low-income students? What are the benefits to supporting their financial stability? What are some strategies of how to do so and examples of how this has already been done? And most importantly, how can your colleges assess your own readiness and capacity to increase support for your own low-income students?
And Priya, this is Rob real quickly, just to chime in and say, we're really excited about this project, and I just want to step back for a second and share with you a little bit of the framing of the project, which is that Lumina asked us about a year ago to kind of put together a toolkit for the field for 2- and 4-year colleges, really focused on folks on the ground, trying to serve these students better. Priya and I both have had a chance in the last 4 or 5 years to work on the vast majority of major national initiatives around improvement, things like Completion by Design and the Aspen Prize for Community College Excellence, and Guided Pathways projects with Lumina, new Guided Pathways projects with Kresge. We're in Arkansas and Ohio and North Carolina, Texas Completes, Florida. So we've had a chance to see a lot of what's going on around the country. And it's interesting to me, looking back over my decade in community colleges, is nearly every project talks about serving low-income students. And this is the first one I've really been a part of that's designed solely for the purpose of focusing on low-income students and changing the conditions so that many more of them can succeed. All of those other projects, Achieving the Dream, of course, being an umbrella and the historical kind of first mover in this space, have worked really hard on this, and I think this is not a new direction in terms of shifting 180 degrees, but it can build on all that we've learned in the totality of these other projects and can create a knowledge base to move forward. It's really exciting work. It is, by the way, you did see a draft watermark on the copy you got. We are working with Lumina to have a soft launch / beta version of this public in early 2015, hopefully in January or February, working potentially with some of your colleges as well to help frame the conversation for a later full release of the document later in 2015. So it is a draft for now. The idea is not likely to change much. There may be some additions to it, but I just wanted to give that framing before Priya dove into it. And I will now mute myself and let Priya take yourself through it. But we're very excited to work with you and hear back from you as well. At the end of the call, Priya will talk about that as well. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for that context, Rob. And we also want to mention that Rob and I are here. If you, after the webinar, have additional questions or would like more information, we're so happy to provide more of that information to you. The way that this is going to work, we're probably going to be sharing the content of this material for the next hour, and then you'll have about 10-15 minutes at the end to ask any kind of questions as well. And I think Alyssa is also going to be monitoring in case there are any questions that come up as well. So you do have an opportunity at the end to also use this space to ask additional questions. So without further ado, let's get started. Alyssa, would you move to the next slide, please? So before we launch into this work, I really want to share the guiding principles that have been the compass for us. And there are three big principles. The first one is that there are many low-income students. Approximately, with research that we'll share with you, approximately 1 out of every 3 undergraduates in America who could achieve the educational goals if it were not for the challenges that a lack of resources create. So we know that there is a substantial population that Rob has addressed that has been indirectly addressed through many of the initiatives, but there are opportunities for us to address it very directly. The second is we believe that when institutions structure this kind of support, the variety of financial supports beyond financial aid, in really structured, coherent, consumable ways, that we believe that this will benefit students in their ability to stay in school and complete their educational goals, as well as opportunities for the colleges to enjoy higher revenues, as well as meet some of the more institutional outcomes that they're seeking as well. And then the third part is actually a promise and a space for hope and optimism that this is not impossible. Many of the strategies that we're going to share and the examples that we're going to share verify that this has already been done. And we're certain that in your colleges as well, there are opportunities of success and there are things that are already working. And what we're saying is there are ways that we can build off of this and make it more integrated, make it more coherent to be able to impact more students in a systematic, intentional way. Alyssa? Great. So one other piece that we want to mention here, we keep tossing the term around financial stability, and we want to really clarify what we mean by that. So in this toolkit particularly, we're redefining what we mean by making college affordable. And this goes beyond the traditional definition of financial aid that includes grants, loans, scholarships. And we're really talking about what are some of the practical needs that students have that affect their ability to financially afford a college education. So we're talking about access to reliable and adequate nutrition, transportation, housing, childcare, as well as other types of services, including financial services, legal, and tax services. And so this is not to say that we don't think that other conversations need to take place, including conversations around pricing structures, in addition to conversations around financial aid support and strategies, how scholarships are awarded. And so our focus right now is really looking at financial support from a broader perspective, but it's not to say that other conversations aren't necessary. Great. And so the toolkit that has been provided to you, here is kind of a breakdown of the major parts. It is broken up into 2 big sections, and each section has 2 little sections. So the first piece is actually a primer, and this kind of lays out the environment of low-income students. The first part is called Making the Case for Improved Support to Low-Income Students, and this is where we present research and literature that talk about the experiences, the academic and educational experiences of low-income students, and talks about why there is a need and why there are benefits associated with supporting low-income students. And then part 2 goes into how can you do something about it. So part 2 is really about 6 strategies that we have developed that can support low-income students that also have associated examples and resources attached to them. And then the second big part is where you as a college can actually make sense of this. The second big part includes a self-assessment instrument and an interpretation guide. So part 3 is a self-assessment instrument that actually mirrors all 6 of the strategies. So for each of the 6 strategies discussed in part 2, we build out a series of items that you can assess your own college's readiness and capacity for. So and then from there, based on how you respond to those areas in part 3, part 4 allows you to interpret those results and determine what kind of action you may want to take based on that. And we've really designed the self-assessment instrument kind of as a GQ magazine or 17 magazine quiz. So it's for each of the items you rate yourself as A, B, or C. You're doing it a lot, whatever the item is. You're doing it somewhat. You're not doing it at all. And then the interpretation guide will say, well, if you answered mostly A's, it means yada, yada. If you answer mostly B's, it means something else. And so we're trying to make the self-assessment instrument a relatively easy way to gauge where you are and where there might be opportunities to move forward. And one really important piece about this, the self-assessment instrument is not meant to identify or expose your deficiencies. It's not like if you answer that you're not doing many of those items that it looks negatively on your college. In complete opposite, it's actually meant to just highlight some areas where you might already be able to use what you're doing and build off of that. And if there are other items that your college has not addressed, you can determine if that might be a good fit based on what you're already working on, where your priorities are, et cetera.
Yeah, and Priya, on that point, I mean, we're really honest with you here. We have not found a lot of colleges. And by the way, Priya and I both work for community colleges in California. We understand. I mean, you on this call, the Wolfson colleges, are doing more in a structured and strategic way to move this forward than the vast majority, if not 97 to 99% of colleges, have done intentionally on this feature. So I think there is a tendency, by the way, when you look at the actual self-assessment instrument to go, wow, we're not doing much, or wow, there's so much to do here, it's overwhelming. And I think part of what I really want to emphasize what Priya is saying about this is intended to spark conversation and discussion about where you could go. It's certainly not a checklist of the 29 things you need to do, although it feels that way at times. And so we want to be really clear about the framing of it, that it's intended to start conversations. It's intended to help share with you what others have done on their campuses and to start conversations. And so it can be a little overwhelming, and I think we've gotten when Priya has had the chance to scaffold this conversation with colleges in the room, we really make that point quite strong. So I just want to emphasize it here because it's hard not seeing our faces to emphasize how earnest and erstwhile we are about this point.
Yes. Great. Thank you so much, Rob. So we will circle back to the self-assessment instrument and interpretation guide, and we'll actually weave those pieces in so you can actually see how the strategies relate to the instrument itself. But as Rob is saying, we really believe that this is meant to be a support for you, something that really complements the work that you're already doing in the initiative, what you may already be doing on your campus. So there might be aspects of this that can be really informative to build your overall plan as well. So moving forward, I'm just going to take a few minutes to lay out the land of low-income students and their academic and non-academic experiences. Most of this may be very familiar to you as you've already been delving into supporting low-income students, but this is just kind of a brief overview. And again, details for this are included in the toolkit as well. So we can actually skip there we go. We can go to the next one. Perfect. Yeah. So we're going to be talking in this section, we're going to talk about who are low-income students, how many are there, what are their non-academic experiences, what are their academic experiences that really impact their college experience at your institution. Next, please. Great. So the first question is, how many low-income students are there? And this was a survey that we pulled out where it was done of all the undergraduate institutions in America. And again, this depends on what we define quote-unquote low-income students as, whether you do it by income level or you do it by family size. In this case, if we define low-income students as those who receive the Pell, then this diagram shows that over 1 out of 3, if you look in the orange column at the very right for the academic year 12-13, I think it shows 36%, and that is basically the percentage of students of all undergrads enrolled, how many are actually receiving Pell Grants, and that's 1 out of 3. Keeping in mind that more low-income students choose community colleges, and this particular statistic is including 2-year and 4-year institutions, and also keeping in mind that not all students who are eligible for Pell actually apply and receive it, the chances that this number is higher on your campus is possibly very likely. So in other words, we're underestimating.
It underestimates the, like for example, the folks in California community college system, who very few students are on Pell in California because the fees are low and the tuition is low, but the overall cost of going to college is high. And so Pell's not a big, there are certain states where this is true. California is certainly one of them with over 2 million students. So I think that this number, as a representation of low-income status, is probably underrepresented by at least 10 or 15 points.
Mm-hmm. And as we're going to continue in our conversation, we really want you to understand what it is at your institution. This is just to make a broad statement that there might be more low-income students than one may expect at an institution, and this substantial population needs that kind of structured support and can also provide benefits to many people in many ways. And so in this case, for example, we are underestimating the poverty levels of our students, as Rob mentioned, and again, it can vary by institution. Next slide, please. Great. So who are low-income students? What are some of their common characteristics? And the truth is they can be anybody. They can be male, they can be female, they can be single parents, working parents, they can be students with disabilities, foster youth, and it can include racial and ethnic minorities. And if you factor all of these in to see what is the ratio of low-income students at your institution, that might help look at how substantial this population is. In many cases, many of these students are the first in their families to attend colleges, which can affect their ability to navigate the higher education channels. It can really question their ability to do that. They may or may not have the skills and knowledge to do so, or even know how to access public benefits that can support their ability to go to school. And in terms of public benefits, they might come from cultures and environments where receiving assistance or getting help or taking on debt is not received positively in their families, so they may abstain from doing so. And one of the biggest pieces is that even though they may qualify for types of financial aid, whether it's grants and or loans, they may still have an unmet financial need. And these financial needs can take the form of inadequate access to food, to shelter, to transportation, to many of these practical real-life realities that may or may not be addressed by their financial aid alone. Other situations include low credit scores, not having a plan for their savings, not knowing how to completely manage all their finances or their debts. And so there are these different types of non-academic skill sets that may affect their ability to move through college. Next slide, please. And then when it comes to their actual academic impact, the stress that having, the stress with financial concerns can lead to their delaying their entry into college after high school. It can lead them to work to go to school part-time instead of going full-time because they may have part-time or full-time jobs or individuals that they're taking care of. It may result in their inability to have consistent enrollment from term to term. They may disengage from school. They may stop out. They may drop out. And low-income students are also more likely to attend institutions that may not lead to occupations that have higher earnings, or they may be less likely to attend selective institutions, or they may be less likely to graduate on time or at all. So there are many types of academic concerns that having concerns or challenges with financial stability can cause. In many ways, they're balancing school with so many competing priorities, whether it's work or families, that constantly compete for the time and effort that they're able to provide. And this is one piece of research that we've pulled out from the toolkit that makes a really big case here. This is showing that we know that low-income students who arrive underprepared are less likely to progress and succeed at the institution. But in this case, if you notice here, this shows the test scores of students compared to their income level. And if you look at the top left, it says that 30% of low-performing, so below average test scores, low-performing, high-income, richest students complete college. And you compare that with the bottom right, 26%, and that says 26% of the high-performing, low-income students complete college. And so this is to say that even if you score, knowing that test scores are only one form of success, but if you look at this is saying, even if you score highly, the fact that you're in a low-income area, it may affect your ability to be successful, and it's likely that those who perform less well may still do better if they're coming from a different income bracket. And this is to say that income plays a stronger role than we can expect in the ability of students to progress and complete.
Yeah, just real quickly, Priya, I think this is a really sobering graphic. It may be, when I've shown this in public, I do a lot of presentations. This one's pretty sobering. It hits at a bunch of fundamental assumptions that are kind of hidden underneath the surface of higher education. And one of them, just to call it out clearly, is that college is a meritocracy, where the strong and smart succeed and the weak and unsmart do not succeed. I mean, many of you may not, it's not often said that way in public on a campus, but whenever I bring this up, I get a lot of very knowing glances about people who feel like this is really underneath the surface of how their college makes assumptions about students. And I think this is a really important point here that, I mean, this is a vast difference between the above average test scores in the highest income and the lowest income quartile. And that's basically said that 3 out of, this isn't college going rates, by the way. That's a different metric, which also shows a lot by income. This is actually graduation rates. It shows that even highly qualified low-income students really struggle to make it through college. And this idea that this is something about the student, that we classically either intentionally or unintentionally blame the student for everything that goes wrong, suggests that there's a huge problem that we may need to address here. I think if there's one piece of information that makes a call for urgency out of this entire toolkit that we've found, it's this one right here. That we would argue that the differences on the below-average test score side are important, but particularly making clear to us that we have a lot of really well-qualified students who are not able to make it through college, clearly for reasons related to income and financial stability.
Great. Next slide, please. So we go into, in the toolkit, we go into greater detail about how supporting low-income students can yield benefits to students, can yield benefits to the institution, can yield benefits to society. And we've just extracted a few here to make a point about how institutions can benefit. And these are 5 of the benefits that we've pulled out. There might be others that you can also determine based on your particular capacities. But for us, the big 5 are supporting low-income students, especially if it is such a substantial population on your college campus, can improve key indicators for institutional performance. And these can be things like retaining students from term to term, having students make progress towards a program of study, completing their educational goals, transferring to another a 4-year institution, and also seeing wage gains and employment rates increase as a result of this. Supporting low-income students can also address calls for accountability that the college might face from external agencies, and also support the ability to say that quality and affordable access is available for all students. The third is to create economic benefits. The fact that students are able to stay in school from term to term will yield increased revenue for tuition, as well as apportionment from the state. So there are those academic or economic benefits as well. The fourth is something that Rob was also mentioning earlier about the achievement gap, and this might be less about the achievement part and more about supporting students with the resources they need to succeed. And in so doing, narrow the achievement gap when it comes to race and ethnicity, and also in terms of income level. And then the fifth is In providing broader types of financial supports to students, the college is going to probably partner with local agencies, workforce development agencies, government agencies, and there might be a stronger connection that it continues to have with its own community, which for community colleges is such a major part of our own identity. And like I mentioned, all these benefits are included in greater detail in your toolkits, and this is what we've included to help colleges make the case for why supporting low-income students can be beneficial in many, many ways. Next slide, please. Great, so now we're going to actually spend a little bit of time going through each of the strategies. So knowing that there might be a substantial portion of your campus that has low-income students, that are low-income students, knowing that there are benefits to supporting low-income students, knowing that you might already be doing multiple things that might be supporting low-income students, what else can be done? And so this next section highlights 6 major strategies that can increase the support for low-income students. And for each of these strategies, what we're going to do is give some brief key points. We're going to highlight one quick example. And we're also going to pull out some of the items from the actual self-assessment instrument so you can see when you do take it with your colleagues what those aspects look like. So it'll give you a taste of what it looks like. And again, all of this is included in the toolkit as well. Next slide, please. So here are the 6 strategies for supporting low-income students at a glance. The first is to know the low-income students at your particular institution. The second is to provide supports that help low-income students overcome practical barriers. The third is to really leverage external partnerships in your community for service delivery. The fourth is to empower low-income students to use what's already there, to utilize available resources. The fifth is to review your internal processes at your own institution and how they impact low-income students. And the sixth is to do all of this in the context of other practices that are known to support all students. So the first 5 are really focusing on low-income students, and the 6th one is really focused on how can you weave specific support services back in with other types of initiatives and campus efforts that you're going through that can also support low-income students. One other key point that I want to make before we jump in is that the first one is the most fundamental and the key strategy. Without addressing the first one, the other ones may not be as holistically addressed. And the first one's really key because it's talking about what is the particular situation at your own institution. So while the others are not in any particular order, and they can vary based on your culture, your priorities, the first one is probably the most important one because it sets the case for your own institution outside of other statistics. Next slide, please. Great. So the first strategy is to know the low-income students at your own institution. And as I mentioned, each institution really varies based on where you're located, the kind of students that you attract, the kind of community that you service, the kind of employers that exist. Based on all of that, your programs and services are offered in a particular way. So in order to best address what would support your low-income students, the best way is to know what your low-income students experience at your own institution, what kinds of resources they use, what kind of services they use. And so in the second bullet, we talk about some of the questions that you can ask of yourself, of your own institution. How many of your students are economically disadvantaged? How do you even define what an economically disadvantaged student is? What are their levels of unmet needs that goes beyond what is covered by financial aid? What are the rates at which your low-income students progress and succeed? What is their experience at the institution? And to address these, we recommend that, of course, you have quantitative data that you could get from your institutional research office, but also what kinds of qualitative data can you include in this as well? And qualitative data could include focus groups, interviews with students. It could also include focus groups and interviews with those who work with low-income students to really understand what the low-income student experience is at your institution. And one of the interesting things that we include in the toolkit is Gateway College in Kentucky actually did poverty simulations with faculty and staff to make this more real for them. What are the day-to-day realities of low-income students? And so there are examples of how colleges are trying to help their colleagues understand what it means to go through an academic experience as a low-income student to make this more real and more concrete for those that may or may not be as familiar with them. So one of the examples that we include in this is something that Georgia State University is doing. Georgia State University actually is doing something that's an example of microgrants based on data. And they award what they call Panther retention grants to students who have a genuine unmet need and are on track for graduation. But these students have been dropped because they had an unpaid balance on their account. And the unpaid balance might be something like less than $1,000. And in the last year, they actually awarded 2,000 seniors with these micro grants, basically allowing them to register for their last year in school. And in that year, 70% graduated within 2 semesters. And these are students who, if their balance had not been supported by the college, they may have stopped out, waiting another term until they got their finances in order, or they might have dropped out, and it's unclear whether or not they would have come back. So this is an example where Georgia State University looked at their own institutional data, identified which students were close to completing, and found a way to be able to support their needs. Next, please. And then in the self-assessment instrument, for this particular strategy, we have 15 total items. And I've just pulled out 3 of these items to give you an example of what it looks like. Here would be your college would rate yourself on, my institution has identified the number of low-income students, or my institution tracks the unmet need levels for each individual student, or my institution uses the information from FAFSA to determine what kind of support students might be eligible for. So there are different types of related items to the strategy in the self-assessment instrument that you can use to see how your college addresses some of these areas. Next, please. The second strategy is to provide support that helps low-income students overcome practical barriers. And so this broader financial support definition includes access and enrollment into public benefits such as nutrition and healthcare. And I know this is something that WFSN is really, really engaged in. The provision of financial and career coaching, and this goes into asset management, other areas that are part of the WFSN structure, and then also implementation of on-campus programs to support services such as automotive repair, tax programs, and legal services. And one thing to really mention here is it's one thing to provide these services, and I believe you call them at different levels, high-touch services, low-touch services. The other part that's really critical in this is the bundling and integrating of these services, that a student doesn't hop around from place to place to be able to access, or that the burden isn't on the student all the time to know which services are possible for them, but opportunities where a student can go to a singular place, a central place, and get access to multiple benefits based on where they particularly are. And an example of this is the Career Pathways Initiative in Arkansas, which does just that, where they've actually coordinated a variety of services, whether it includes social services, workforce and economic development programs, and they're using TANF monies to be able to do this. And they have a single place on campus for their students to go to and get assistance. And the program is primarily for low-income parenting students, where they provide support for childcare, transportation, tuition assistance. But it's a singular place where students can go and get that kind of support. It's done using a case management approach, so a student has a particular advisor that they go to on a regular basis to check in. And there are different types of services that are available based on the funding that is available to them. And then they partner with other groups in the community to be able to add more and more support and resources that could be available to the students as well. Okay, next slide, please. And again, in the self-assessment instrument, there is an entire section that's devoted to strategy 2. There are a total of 20 items, and most of these are, does your college provide X support or Y support or Z support? And then there are also pieces that kind of talk about the integration and bundling. And so just examples here, item 7 in the self-assessment instrument for strategy 2, it says, my institution works with local public transit authorities to ensure that low-income students have access to public transportation to the institution, or my institution ensures that courses and academic programs are scheduled to be available to low-income students who work at different hours of the day or night. One of the points that was made before is we may have classes available at night that support students who are working during the day, but do we have services that are available at night? So can a student see a counselor? Can a student get some support for their financial aid? Can a student go for tutoring services at the times that they're already coming to school, because those are the times that are available? So these are just some examples of items that are related to strategy 2. Next, please. So strategy 3 is really talking about partnerships. It's talking about partnerships, and it's talking about trying to bring as much service onto the campus as possible. So there are things we do that refer students to other agencies outside of the campus, but are there opportunities where we can partner with the community and bring those services on campus? And so there's so many, and the cool thing about partnerships is that there's so many community partners that exist that share the same missions, the same values as what we're also trying to do for low-income students, and particularly the students. And these can include workforce and government benefits agencies, community and faith-based organizations, organizations that actually provide legal support, tax coaching, preparation, and also corporate partners that want to support their regional communities. And so are there ways that your college can have, first of all, are there ways your college already works with these groups? Are there ways to be able to build on that? Are there ways to be able to see other partners that may have potential to be able to reach out to them and see if there are ways that you can work together? And one example for this was Central New Mexico Community College, where they partnered with United Way, and they to run something called their Voluntary Income Tax Assistance Center, these VITA centers. And through this partnership, the college developed this program called Tax Help New Mexico, where they provided low-income New Mexicans with free assistance in preparing and filing low-income tax returns. And what they would do is pretty novel, and your colleges may or may not do something like this, but what they did was identify their college's accounting students and say that we will give you credit as well as real-world experiences if you help in preparing taxes for your community. And so on one hand, students would earn college credit for their volunteer work, and on the other hand, they would also learn the value of serving the community. And then the community itself would benefit through these types of support services that were provided through the college. The toolkit has other types of examples where colleges have partnered with faith-based organizations to run food pantries, or with banks to be able to do financial coaching. But there might be some really unique and innovative way to build partnerships and build out existing partnerships that might support the college as well, and the students as well. Next. So again, for this strategy on partnerships, we have a total of 7 items in the self-assessment instrument. We've pulled out a few for you here. My institution partners with organizations that provide or could provide free legal services. My institution partners with organizations that provide or could provide workforce and state benefits to low-income students. And it's just an opportunity to say, do we do this or could we do this? And if so, what would it take? And is it worth it? Does it align with what it is that we're doing? Next slide. Strategy 4. So strategy 4 is a unique one because this one's saying, let's not come up with anything new. Let's just empower students to use what already exists. And the truth is, many of the students who need these services are usually not the students who proactively seek out these services. And Rob, I don't know if you want to mention, Rob mentions that many of these students are the kind of students that want to go from like a B+ to an A- or an A- to an A. And they're not necessarily the students
real quickly, Priya.
Yeah, go for it.
I did about it 8 years ago. We were at one of my former colleges in California. We had one of those swipe cards where you could track the students who use student services. And I asked our researcher to, and this was under the kind of, you have to raise your hand to get services model. And when I asked the researcher to track the average GPA of students who took the opportunity to use student services where it was optional, the average GPA was actually 3.7. And so this was a college, and this I don't think is unusual. It was a college that was very, very good at helping B+ students become A- students and A- students become A students. But all those students on the margins, the ones who were on the margins of dropping out to making it, and the ones who were possibly on the margins of struggling to making it really well, we didn't serve those students. It wasn't necessarily that we weren't trying to, but when you have an opt-in model where the students have to raise your hand to get the services, there's a lot of reasons they don't. Stigma associated with it. They don't know how to navigate it. But this was a pretty clear finding from the data I had about a decade ago in California.
Exactly. So this is saying, how can we help those students who would not proactively seek this out to be able to access services that could really support their own situation. And one of the options is to shift the default from an opt-in model to an opt-out model, where students have to actually proactively say that they no longer want a particular service instead of saying that they do. And an example of this is mandatory financial literacy classes that students who enroll must take a financial literacy class in addition. That could be a part of their student orientation or some kind of a financial aid workshop in a way that can support the fact that they will at least access this at some point early in their academic experience. And one big piece of this is so much of what students do on campus may come from the institution, may come from faculty and staff, but in many cases comes from other students. So knowing that peer-to-peer conversations and recommendations are pretty critical, how can we use this in a way to also normalize the behavior? Especially knowing that in many cases, culturally, it's stigmatized to get kinds of support such as the ones we're talking about. And one of the pieces, as an example, we wanted to share was when a college actually was marketing the services of a food pantry. And so they started their marketing activity by saying they had flyers posted that said, we have a food pantry on campus, here are the hours, these are the types of food that we have available, and this is where we're located, come on by. And they noticed that their traffic wasn't that astounding. And what they noticed was, using behavioral economics, that if they started tweaking their language in the flyers, that it could help students be more likely to actually come. And they evolved their flyers to say something to the effect of, did you know that 75% of our students are already using the food pantry? Or something that was really relating the fact that it was already a high demand activity, and the student who was not using it was the one that was out of the loop, and ways to be able to help students be more encouraged to say that others were already doing something. And it's just something for us to think about, like, well, how can we take what is already happening on our campus and make it more likely that students will be able to use it on a more regular basis, or to use it at all. Next slide. And so for strategy 4, which is really about empowering students to use existing services and resources, we have 14 items in the self-assessment instrument that deal with this. And it could include, for example, students at my institution participate in a benefit screening process. Not just to those students who arrive in the institution, knowing that they need financial assistance. So this is where, and many colleges are doing this already, where a student comes in for financial aid and they're already flagged because there are opportunities in the FAFSA that help identify these students where they're already flagged. And so when a student meets with a financial aid advisor, the advisor will say, oh, did you know that you also qualify for XY public benefits? Or there are other ways that students are already identified so that they can be screened for other benefits while they're already meeting for other things. And this goes back to an earlier strategy about bundling and integrating multiple services and resources in a more centralized way. Another example for this is students at my institution understand the full cost of attending the institution and the different ways to pay for it. So this is going into financial literacy, the ability of a student to know what the value of the education is, knowing what the cost of the education is, beyond just tuition, so they can really learn how to plan for it while they're there. Next, please. Great. The fifth one is a really interesting one also, kind of staying in tandem with the last strategy about helping students use existing services. The same goes for reviewing your own internal processes. So how are your policies, practices, processes affecting the ability of students to succeed at your institution? And in many cases, sometimes our colleges will build policies that are convenient at one point, at the time that they're built, or the process is reasonable at the time that it was constructed. But now it may have unintended impacts. And sometimes many of these happen specifically on low-income students. without our intention or our awareness of it. And so one example for this was one of the colleges, I believe it was Georgia State University, they had this pre-nursing program that required students to take all sorts of courses to qualify to apply for the nursing program. And knowing that the majority of the students who were going to apply for the nursing program were not going to be eligible for, or were going to be accepted into the program, they were unintentionally putting the students out of courses, or they were making students take courses that were so specific to nursing that once the student didn't make it into the nursing program, there was no value for those classes. Plus, students were spending extra money just taking those nursing courses and not getting into the program itself. And so they actually realized what impact it was having on low-income students. They realized what impact it was having on the financial aid that was available, especially with the countdown or the time limit that's available on financial aid now. And they reorganized their pre-nursing program and their eligibility requirements to be much more mindful of these kinds of things. And so we, in this strategy, are really talking about what can your college do to review or update, reorganize, and streamline your processes that can really help students get to their particular goals, that can help them enroll in courses, help them access services. And what are some things that may be in the way of these students that we don't even realize it? And so one way to do that is to, however you find it convenient for you, to flowchart the experience of your low-income students. Whether you map out what a low-income student goes through from day one at the institution, or you map out what a day in the life of a student, of a low-income student, looks like. However you want to simulate what that low-income student experience is, it might reveal some parts of your processes that might be unintentionally getting in the way of your students as well. And one example of this is at Skyline College. They created something called a comprehensive diversity framework. And it's really centered around one big question. And they basically, they got together, faculty, staff, counselors, students, and they asked the question, how do our practices and processes in connection to the college, entry into the college, progression, and completion, how do these practices and processes for the college experience impact campus equity and student success at our college? And so they were using the completion by design loss momentum framework with the 4 phases: connection, entry, progress, and completion. But the big question they were asking is, how does what we do impact our students? And what they did was they identified the areas of disproportionate impact as it relates to student success in their own services. And from that, they actually built a student equity plan that addresses many of these areas and tries to equalize some of the impact for different types of students in positive ways. Side note, California as a state is asking all of its community colleges to build student equity plans where one of the aspects they are addressing is their support for low-income students as well. So they actually have a website. Again, this resource is in the toolkit as well. They have a website for what that framework looks like, what are some of the practices that they did as a team to go through the framework and pull out some of the areas in their internal processes that were possibly causing concerns and what they're going to be doing as a result of it. Next, please. Yes. And so again, strategy 5 has 8 items, and it just has different types of suggestions in the items. My institution has a flowchart or a document that indicates the steps that low-income students need to take to enter and navigate the services around financial stability. So what does it take for a student to be able to qualify for support with healthcare or support with nutrition or whatever the case may be? Another one is my institution provides information and education to faculty and student services professionals to ensure that everyone understands the circumstances and challenges faced. This is also where, when I talked earlier about the poverty simulation, this is where that can also play a role, because this is about how to engage everyone at the campus, other stakeholders in this process, how to engage them in a way that helps them understand what low-income students go through and what role they can play in helping students access the services that can help them. Next, please. And then the final strategy of the 6 strategies is really about implementing effective practices to strengthen the progression of all students. So this is where we've talked, the last 5 strategies have been very exclusively focused on low-income students. And the 6th one goes has us step back a little bit and look at what are the types of activities, efforts, initiatives on campus that are already underway that are supporting all students, and how can the work that we're doing with low-income students feed into that? And so these practices, these effective practices can include helping incoming students identify their educational goals, identify their career interests, develop those individualized ed plans, offering more structured pathways, helping students get into programs of study, and identifying courses that really lead to the success that students are interested in. And then also other effective practices include how we help students monitor their own progress and track their progress towards a goal, how we also manage that and what we do with that information, helping students know the exact costs of programs, and also supporting students once they complete their educational goals into either transferring to a 4-year institution or moving into employment in a way that's beneficial for them. And one thing to really note here is that all of these activities are critical to all students, but the absence of these activities might actually become more detrimental to low-income students. So if we don't provide support, for example, in an educational plan, or if we don't provide support in a structured way for students to access the career possibilities, then low-income students, many of whom are the first in their families to go to college, that may not have that kind of contextual knowledge or that background knowledge on how to navigate education, they may have an even harder time trying to figure out which courses they need to take, knowing how far they need to go to be able to earn a credential, and how that certificate can lead to another certificate. Those kinds of behind-the-scenes common sense might not be as available to them, and supporting them in these ways, supporting these effective practices can actually make a bigger impact for them and their ability to move forward. And then to relate to this, the next slide
real quickly, I mean, and that example the example you gave earlier about the nursing program at Georgia State, I mean, I think that's a really powerful one. And I have another example from Completion by Design College in Ohio, Stark State, who just real quickly went into this process of looking at their range of pre-nursing students. I mean, any of you that have nursing programs, I'm guessing the average number of students in that program per year ranges from like 60 to about 150. And the question they asked at Stark State is, how many pre-nursing students do we actually have? And they had a program of about that size, and they found that they had somewhere between 1,500 and 1,750 students who actually thought they were pre-nursing. So this is actually a huge issue that Priya brings up in general about what do we do with students who consider themselves pre-nursing, many of whom will never get into the nursing program. At Stark, they went one step further, and they also happened to have a 3.0 minimum GPA requirement to get into the nursing program. What they did there was they asked their researcher to run a list of all of the students who had below a 3.0 GPA. And it turns out there were hundreds of these students. Almost half of those students that we mentioned, of the 1,700 students, actually had GPAs below 3.0. And they actually targeted communications to them. For those who were close, they told them, hey, you're close to 3.0. Here's a GPA calculator, which, by the way, if you're bored sometime, try to figure out how many units you need to take if you have a 2.72 GPA and 37 credits. How many units you need to take at what grade to hit 3.0. So they gave them a calculator for that. But to fast forward the story, to get down to the bottom students who had the lowest GPAs, they called them in and they said, look, you're not going to be a nurse here. You have no chance of getting into the nursing program. Your GPA is too low. What about these other programs we have that really could be helpful to you? So they caught these students, even though it was hard, and some of the students were crying in their offices. They caught these students before it was 3 years later, and they had 3 more years of debt and no progress towards any degree. And so those are the type of things, those are effective practices in general, but as Priya said, they are so much more injurious to the pathway and really to the life, kind of the life goals of the low-income students who can't afford to not have their credits count. So, I mean, these programs that I mentioned earlier that we work on, Completion by Design, and the Guided Pathways projects from Lumina, and the Guided Pathways projects from Kresge, I see them as critical, especially for low-income students who honestly cannot afford, literally cannot afford, to not have their credits count towards something on the pathway. So I think this is a really important section to call out the importance of the interaction between projects like WIPSN and projects like we're talking about here, as well as other of these national initiatives that are really moving in this direction of making things much more highly structured and making sure that students are on pathways, know where they're going, know how they're going to get there, and the colleges are reworking their kind of approaches to help that happen. So I think this is an incredibly important interaction.
Yeah. And any opportunities to be able to weave the WSSN efforts into existing initiatives on campus can only strengthen this. There's so many shared goals to these variety of initiatives, and if there are ways that we can weave those in together, that would be amazing. And what's interesting is that even, and the opposite rings true as well, so even the kinds of supports and services that are provided initially and intentionally for low-income students, they can benefit all the students. So support services that might help students utilize existing supports, like we were talking in Strategy 4, or reviewing our internal processes to improve the student experience in Strategy 5, those don't stop at just low-income students that are being supported by these. These are supporting all students. So there are ways that this is really weaving in and out a variety of student experience. Great, so the next, and so here also in the self-assessment instrument, which we'll walk through in just a couple of minutes, this is just a sample set of items for Strategy 6. There are 18 total items. Here are 3 of them that my institution works with all incoming students to match their interests and existing skills to potential careers. So how do students learn about what is out there academically for them? My institution helps students monitor their own progress towards their educational goals. So if I'm a student, how do I know if I'm halfway there or I'm almost there, or what else I need to take to finish a particular certificate or degree? My institution tracks the wages of students after they complete their program. And again, you may or may not be doing this. Some of this is just to give you something to think about as you're building in the other additional types of services. That are there ways that you can also see what happens to students afterwards. And this is also where you can really work with your institutional research office and others on campus that might be collecting some of these data that might be helpful both to you and also to the student to know these types of details. Next, please. So coming back, I wanted to spend a couple of minutes just walking you through the toolkit. So if you can, please go ahead and load your toolkit onto your screen. And I'm just going to walk through it very quickly with you, just so you're familiar. It's daunting because it's 65 fantastic pages, but it's not meant to be daunting. It's meant to be navigable, just like we're trying to make it for our students as well. So if you go to page 2, which is the beginning of the table of contents, it actually runs you through all the 4 major parts. So we have an executive summary, which is a 3-page summary of all of this, if you'd like to share it with your colleagues, just to prime them on some of the work that's being done. And then we have the actual primer on page 11. And I'll walk through this in just a minute. And then we have parts 1 and 2 that really try to make the case and go through each of the 6 strategies. And then where we really want to also focus your attention is on the actual self-assessment instrument, which begins on page 35. So why don't we actually move down to page 35 and we can walk you through what the instrument actually looks like. And so as you're scrolling through, you might notice that there are different types of pull-out boxes that have examples. We really try to sprinkle in a lot of resources and a lot of links that you can access that can give you more information based on what your specific college teams and your specific college may need. So as you move your way through, try to find your way to page 35. And page 35 is the beginning of the second big section, which talks about the self-assessment instrument and interpretation guide. And some of the pieces are bolded because we really want to emphasize these. So for example, we say that this inventory is not designed to identify deficiencies. It's really an opportunity to identify where you already have traction and see what other activities can be broadened or deepened. And then in the third one, we actually even introduce who at your institution could take the self-assessment, how to take it. So again, it's completely up to you, but we do make some suggestions that you could include administrators and practitioners at your institution, people from academic affairs, instruction, student development services, financial aid, admissions, enrollment, institutional research. I mean, the list is really about what's reasonable for you and which voices on your institution you want to include in this kind of discussion. And it's up to you. You can either have them take the self-assessment instrument individually and then come together and talk about it, or you could all just come together and take it together. But the biggest part of this is what happens after you take the instrument, the actual discussion, the actual what does this really mean and where do we go from here.
And I would encourage you, just from some can I pop in for a second? I would encourage real quickly to have that be as in the perfect world, this would be as cross-functional a team as possible. We've done some work. I've done some work with Jobs for the Future with some policy audits in Ohio, and one of the things that comes up pretty quickly is that there is not a shared understanding of internal policy between the members, between the practitioners on your campus. I won't name the state or the college the names. I'm guessing we would all find this, but there were many items we asked about where we would have 1/3 of the respondents say we did that, 1/3 say they didn't do it, 1/3 didn't know. And so it's pretty sobering, actually, that we're leaving our students to kind of navigate different information they're getting from different parts of the campus. But however you go about this, whether you have people do it individually and then come together collectively or you do it collectively, I would encourage the use of those cross-functional teams because there are pockets of knowledge on your campus where there's deep experience with certain issues, but in many cases, it's not spread throughout the campus.
I think you're so right, Rob, and I think one of the interesting parts is that when we talk about in strategy number 3, really about leveraging relationships and partnerships in the community, the first place is to see where they may already exist on your campus. And there might be things that certain departments and offices are doing on your campus that you may or may not know about. And just building bridges between those departments and those services might actually increase the support that your students already have access to without even starting to work with partners in the community. I'm not saying that one is not necessary and the other one is, but there might be amazing internal partnerships that you can leverage through this process as well. So if you, for example, go to, let's see, if you go to page 36, I'm just going to do a quick run through of how to work through the instrument, and then I think we'll actually start opening it up for questions. So if you go to page 36, it's the first strategy, and the way it works is it gives you a little brief on the strategy, and then there is a rating scale that tells you that for each item, you can either award yourself an A, a B, or a C. And an A means we do this item regularly for most or all of our students. B, we've done this, but not regularly, and not for all of our students. Or C, we just haven't done this at all, and that's okay. This is just to give you a snapshot of where you are. And you basically take the A, B, C scale, and you go ahead and identify it for each of the items. So you take the first item. My institution has identified the number of low-income students. And then you just go through all of the instrument or all of the tasks, the items that are associated with each of the strategies. So you go through these 15, and then you work through the rest of them. And then if you scroll down to page, thanks, Alyssa, I appreciate you doing on the screen as well. If you come down to page 49, this is where it gets magazine style, and this is where it's the so what of what you've learned so far. So if you come down on page 49, it'll actually say, it'll give you a quick disclaimer that we recommend that certain people be at the table when you start discussing the findings, but it'll say if you answered mostly A, yada, 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 and then it'll have a few questions that you can use in your meetings to start the discussion to move forward beyond that. If you answered B, that you do some of those things for some of your students, it has a different set of questions that you could be asking in your discussions with the different people that are at the table. If you answered mostly C, it has different questions. So basically, you would take the self-assessment instrument, and then you would see where you fit for each of the strategies, and then you take a look at some of the discussion questions that we're suggesting. Of course, you don't have to use those. You can use some of those, you can change them, but basically it's to launch the conversations of what does this mean now? How does this affect what we're already planning through this initiative? How does this impact what we're thinking about doing? Are there other things we should be considering? Are there other things that we're already doing that we may just want to leverage a little bit more? But that's really the purpose of the self-assessment instrument. So, Rob, I wanted to ask if you have any other final thoughts that you'd like to share, other highlights of this experience that you think might be good for colleges, and then after that we can open it up for questions from everyone.
No, I mean, in general, Priya, I think you've done a great job at laying this out. I just want to again share with you our excitement about this process, and this really is a process where we've been working on this with our co-authors Darla Cooper and Kelly Karanja from California, and a wide variety of folks have weighed in on this. within the Lumina Foundation and a great panel of experts around the country and folks who've been on the trenches of this, including the experience of Woofson and ATD and others involved in this. And this is going to be, I mean, Lumina is planning on supporting this moving forward in a way so that it's living and breathing, and we're going to figure out what that looks like in 2015. But we want to let you know we're not just going to publish this and go away. This is something where we hope to be able to provide some context around it, potentially working with projects and initiatives to help integrate the thinking, and again, also provide the toolkit will be freely available so any college can take a look at it as well. So we are excited about getting feedback, whether that's today or in other forms, but we would be happy to now answer any questions that may come up.
Alyssa, would you prefer that people just type their questions, or would you like them to be typed in?
So there are two different ways. I usually do it based off of, what the attendee's preference is. You can either chat me a question, and I can read it out loud to the whole group, or anyone can feel free to raise their hand and talk to us on the line. I find that most people just prefer to chat it, but I'm open to whatever anyone's preference is on the call.
Why don't we let it happen either way? Why don't we open the line up for verbal, and people can also, I'll make sure that if people are typing in questions, we catch them as well.
Great. So the first question we have is just really what differentiates this toolkit from other toolkits that are already provided to colleges relevant to student success?
We really believe that this is the first toolkit that addresses the experiences of low-income students and also addresses financial supports beyond financial aid. So if you're looking to work particularly with this population, or you're looking to expand the definition of what support services could be available that expand beyond the college, start partnering with other groups outside of the college, this is where that toolkit could be really helpful. And the other pieces of the toolkit, the self-assessment instrument, as well, as much as it is a survey that you can take of your own capacity and readiness, it also has a series of suggestions that are woven in as the items themselves. So just even looking at the items can provide some additional thoughts around how to support students in these multiple ways. Rob, do you have anything else to add about what you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the combination of pieces here is also fairly unique, where you have a fairly expansive draft of the document making the case for why we should pay attention to this in the first place, and then you also have, a list of 6 strategies that someone else could have had different 6 strategies, but looking across the country, looking at the research, what are 6 strategies we can evolve to support low-income students? And then I think the second part is really where we have, a self-assessment instrument where you really can take this look that Priya's talking about and in a holistic way look at where you identify some areas where you think you could move forward. An interpretation guide. I mean, and again, just to share that I've worked since I came to higher ed 12 years ago. I've worked on initiatives since day one, and it's very common, aside from the Woofson approach, that it's very common for more general programs and grants to say they're going to affect low-income students, and this is really a toolkit designed to help that happen. I mean, look at any of the big national initiatives; they will all have that focus on low-income students, and the question is, what does that actually look like? What does it actually look like to support low-income students? And I think this is, it's not the only resource for this, but it's certainly one that provides maybe a different lens into why, how, and what we should do about low-income students to help more and more of them succeed. So,
great, thank you. Our next question, I know you talked a little bit about, that completing this self-assessment should be, a cross-cutting team. But if you could just talk a little bit more about, how you all envision people using the assessment and who comprises that team. So kind of putting in context for WFSN, do you envision a team?
Do you envision a great
yes.
My apologies. I was just so excited to answer the great question. And I'll let Priya go after this. But I just want to share with you another story about what happens often cases. I'm fortunate enough to present around the country hundreds of times in the last decade. And often, I present to big groups and then small groups, and sometimes when I'm on campuses, this is always a bit of a sign sometimes, by the way, where you present to the student services group at one time, the faculty at another time, the administration at a third time. And what I have found in my history is when I present some of these new ideas and redesign principles, say from completion by design, I'll present them to the faculty there first, and they'll say, you know, this stuff's awesome. We really like this stuff. If we only could convince our student services people to follow these principles, we'd be in great shape. And I talk to the student services people, and they look at the same stuff and say, you know, this stuff is awesome. If we only could convince the faculty to change the programs and the way they do things in the classroom, this would be great. And you talk to the administrators, and of course you get another version of the same thing. We need our faculty and student services folks to change. So one of the things that I think the cross-functional team prevents is this I'm a social psychologist, by the way. This is ingrained in my training. This very common tendency to have this be someone else's problem. And I think this low-income student thing is even more ripe for this kind of semi-automatic human nature issue because we assume that financial aid is going to take care of it. I mean, and what we're talking about here, I mean, there's a reason it's titled Beyond Financial Aid. It's not just about the typical and traditional financial aid. This is about an institutional approach to serving low-income students. And to have an institutional approach that isn't siloed into various areas, you need to have cross-functional discussions about it. And so when you're talking about teams, and I don't remember the makings of the switching team specifically, my guess is they're already somewhat cross-functional. The question is how do you spider out from there to affect other parts of the organization? And again, sharing with you the experience on this other project where we were using this policy tool. One of the most effective ways, we saw it done two ways. One within a big group where you had 25 or 30 people from throughout the campus talking about these issues and coming up with one response. But equally interesting was actually when you gave each individual person the chance to do the survey and then looked at the results and then shared with them, here's what we found when we talked to everyone, and then you can have the conversations about where things are viewed somewhat differently and where the opportunities might lie. So I think there's a lot of ways to do this. In the end of the day, for me, it's about your campus culture and about knowing what is most likely to have the strongest effect in your campus. Some of you are in shared governance states or union colleges where it would be really important to involve those leaderships early. Even for those of you who aren't, I would argue that the practitioners on the ground, the faculty, student services professionals, are integrating their experiences is going to be incredibly important. Greer, what do you think?
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. I also feel like the value of having a cross-functional team look at this either and take the survey or the instrument individually or as a team. I think part of this is also the bigger issue of engagement on our campuses. That usually what happens is there are the usual suspects. There are people who are generally the ones that you see associated with many, many initiatives. They're usually the ones that raise their hands and they get involved because they believe in it, because they already know so much about how these initiatives tend to work. But for these to be sustained and for these to be institutionalized on campus will require a broader engagement across the campus. But a year from now when, or a year and a half from now when I think many of your WFSN services are going to be put into play, this is going to require faculty and staff to also be on board with what is being expected of these changes. So if how will a faculty member know when to reach out to a student to refer them to a particular service based on what that student needs? And so this is going to start engaging broader groups of people on campus. And I think it starts with the kinds of people that are at the table for these big discussions in the beginning, and what kinds of perspectives they bring in, what kind of realities they know about students because of their unique vantage points that can come in. And I can't stress the importance of students in this. Students will tell you. Students will tell you what they go through to be able to make it to your class, or to be able to know when to ask for a particular service or to apply for something specific. So any opportunity, in addition to this instrument, to continue to incorporate the student voice will be an incredibly important asset in making this work.
Thank you both so much. That was a great response. I did get one question for clarification, and just noticed that the assessment and how it outlines A, B, and C does not align with the interpretation piece. So as we said, this is a draft, so I will make sure that an updated version gets to everyone, and so that no one is confused once they fill out the assessment and then look at the interpretation. So thank you very much, Sarah, for bringing that to our attention. We appreciate it.
That is so helpful. Thank you to whoever identified that. Recently, Rob, well, until recently, we had the scale flipped around. And when we actually had colleges take the self-assessment instrument, they were intuitively thinking that an A means that things are going well and a C means they're not. And so we switched the beginning rating scales, but we didn't switch the interpretation guide. So thank you. We'll make sure that everything is consistent.
Yeah, we are on version like 63.2 of this, and we are very glad that a few people who are still making sure we're keeping up so that their consistency we were just talking about at the colleges is also true within our document. So that's good. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So we don't have any additional questions. I just want to leave time for people to ask any last-minute thoughts, or as you can see on the slide, you should be able to, just double-checking, you can see Priya and Rob's email if you have any questions for them relevant to the toolkit, or if you're interested in taking the self-assessment and have feedback for them, I know they'd appreciate to hear from you, what your experience is with the assessment as well.
And we hope that there's, by the way, a slick design version of this ready for your consumption early in 2015, hopefully as early as January.
Yes.
And to take that one step further, Alyssa, I mean, we were very earnest in that desire to hear more about what you think when you do go through this, or questions you have about it. And as I said, I mean, we're working with Lumina right now to figure out what this is going to look like. The potential is there for some support to occur for a handful of colleges to really go deeply with this. We're not sure what that looks like yet or who we're going to contact for it, but stay tuned on that, because we do think there's a possibility to facilitate these discussions at a campus level as well.
Great. Thank
and we're
you.
just excited about the work. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to take one quick moment and let the colleges know that although we think this is a great toolkit, we're not requiring you to complete this and turn it into us, or there's no requirement. It is a tool for you all. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone on the line knows that. Priya, did you want to add something?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to say how exciting it is to hear that you're all part of the WFSN initiative, and Julian shared with us a little bit about what the initiative is covering, and it's very exciting work. I want to step back and just recognize that part of our commitment as community colleges is to service our community, and the reason why one of the reasons why Rob and I are so excited about this work is because we're really thinking about the student as a whole, and we're thinking about our community in a holistic way, where we're expanding the definitions of what we have traditionally known. So we're just excited in the work that's happening, and any opportunities where we can learn from you, and if you feel like sharing your thoughts about how you may have used this or how you could suggest this being used, we're really, really open to learning with you in a collaborative and ongoing way.
Great, thank you. So I want to thank Priya and Rob again for hosting a great webinar. I hope you all thought it was as exciting and informative as I did. And before we close, I just have a couple of friendly reminders while we have a captive audience. That your implementation plans are due Friday, November 14th. You can email the plan and appendices along with your logic model to the WFSN email pictured on the PowerPoint slide. And then also to please complete your technical assistance survey. I followed up with the colleges that we haven't heard from yet. So please complete that as soon as possible. It will be greatly appreciated by our staff. So thank you again for attending our webinar. As always, if you have any questions, please email us. And thank you again to Rob and Priya. We really appreciate you hosting today's webinar and joining us.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thanks for the
opportunity.
Really great. We look forward to hearing from you guys in the future.
Yes. Good luck, everyone.
Have a great day.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Bye.